Hello, my name is Sarah Jefford and I am a family creation lawyer in Australia. I practice in surrogacy and donor conception across the country. I'm going to talk to you today about the costs of surrogacy, which is always top 10 of the questions from intended parents in particular about how much is surrogacy going to cost and what are the things that we need to budget for ahead of time. The good news is that while we're not sure how much it's going to cost really overall, we can give you some ballpark figures and we can also give you some resources to try and budget and try and work out what those expenses might be before they happen. Intended parents, while surrogacy is altruistic, they need to cover all of the expenses that occur for the surrogate. She shouldn't be out of pocket. She's not making any money, but she needs to have her expenses covered. And as you can imagine, it would be all the expenses that relate to trying to conceive, pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery, and what she might have paid for had she been having her own baby. So lots of those things you can predict. It might be things like IVF expenses. That's probably your biggest expense. Also covering the cost of her getting counselling and legal advice and any medical expenses like blood tests or scans or whether she needs to take prenatal supplements in the attempts to get pregnant. And then during pregnancy, the good news is that a pregnancy for surrogacy is the same as any other pregnancy. So she can access all the Medicare benefits that she would if she was having her own baby. And then if she's having private health, then you can cover the cost of the premiums and any out of pockets. So a scan, for example, might be out of pocket and you need to cover that difference between what Medicare covers and what you need to pay. When it comes to giving birth, the same applies. Most of the pregnancy expenses are covered just the way that they would be if it was her own pregnancy, whether she goes public or private. You also need to cover the surrogate's expenses and her partner's expenses as they relate to things like having a cleaner come around to the house when she's heavily pregnant or she's unwell. It might also include childcare for her kids. So if she needs to go to a doctor's appointment and somebody needs to be caring for her kids, you can pay for the babysitter to do that. You can also go around and look after her kids, depending on your relationship and your connection with them. Other expenses that might come up include maternity clothing, it might be a pregnancy massage or chiropractor treatment. And then of course, after the birth, it's also anything that she might need for post-birth physio or medication and anything that comes out after the birth. You also need to cover the surrogate's lost income. And that's a bit of a tough one to budget for because hopefully she just needs the required 2 to 3 months off around the time of the birth and recovering from the birth before she goes back to work. And she can apply for Centrelink's paid parental leave, which helps you because you only need to pay what she's out of pocket. So what the difference is between what she might get from Centrelink and what she would normally get from her usual job. If she's able to take paid parental leave from her workplace, that's great, but a lot of surrogates are on unpaid leave and the intended parents need to pay for her lost income in those circumstances. If the surrogate is on bed rest, for example, if the doctor says she needs to stop work earlier than usual and stay at home or even go into hospital, the intended parents need to be covering all of her lost income. And that's the biggest and hardest one to budget for because we don't know when it's going to happen. But there are surrogates that have ended up on 10, 12 weeks bed rest before the birth of the baby, and the intended parents need to cover all the expenses, including her lost income and childcare and any medical expenses that come around from that. It's a really hard one to budget for. It is a good idea to have really upfront discussions with your surrogate and her partner about what to expect. She can probably give you some ideas on how much she spent for her last pregnancy, whether or not she had pregnancy massages or chiro, whether she needed lots of medication, and what her income is so that you can budget for the time off. There are some legislation requirements around what you can cover. It needs to be out of pocket. So it can't be that you give her more money than she's already spending on those expenses. And it also needs to be reasonable. So you need to negotiate with your surrogate and her partner about what's a reasonable expense for maternity clothing, or what's a reasonable expense for having a cleaner come around and help us around the time of the birth, for example. You can cover other things, but you really need to be negotiating with your surrogate, and they need to be expenses that are associated with surrogacy, pregnancy, or birth. And how you pay for those things is really important too. And it's a good idea to have those discussions with your surrogate. So she might ask you to give her a card that is attached to your bank account so that she can pay, she can tap and go on expenses when she goes to the chemist or to the doctor. That's a great idea, particularly for interstate arrangements. But likewise, if she pays for something, you can just reimburse her. And it's a good idea to have a written record of what those expenses are in case you need to provide evidence that it was altruistic and that she wasn't making money out of it. There are more resources on my website at sarahjefford.com, including some ideas, lists of expenses that you can expect, and you can use that to discuss with your surrogate so that you can start planning for those expenses as they come up. If you have any questions, you are welcome to have a look around the website and see if the answer is there, or send me an email at hello@sarahjefford.com.